Thank you for listening in on our podcast in the series Intergenerational Conversations on Climate. The podcast brings together voices from high school students and senior citizens from around New Brunswick to discuss their concerns about climate change in our province. The project is the product of Voices for Sustainable Environments and Communities as part of your province's Environmental Trust Fund at Work, exploring concerns and hopes represented by senior citizens and high school students. Climate crises appear in global and national news with increasing frequency and desperation. Voices of concern can be heard every day. Voices of hope are less common. How do our friends and neighbors think about the new climate? Let's find out. I'll start off by saying I'm Bruce Langhus, and I'll be the facilitator.
I'm Brayden Pinio. I live around here in Ormocto. I'm a student for OHS. I enjoy science like chemistry, biology. I'm really good at those. I enjoy it a lot.
Good.
And I'm Claire Ripley. I'm retired. I've spent 34 years teaching and 19 years working for Atomic Energy of Canada. And my interests are certainly connected to the environment. I feel I'm very environmentally conscious and look forward to this.
Let's start then with the questions. First one, whose climate information do you trust? Goes to Claire.
Well, I trust the climate information coming from the science community. I trust the international science community, like the IAE, the International Energy Association. I think the United Nations are a good example of the right factual science that they impart. I don't particularly listen to a lot of environmentalists, for example. I think some of the environmentalists do have a science background, but a lot of them don't. And they're listening to hearsay and don't always have the right facts.
Brayden, whose climate information do you trust?
I don't regularly listen to any environmentalists, but I do listen to my teachers, pay attention, and the climate from what I've heard from teachers, there's like climate change, what I'm learning in class, stuff like that. Also, the news, I don't listen to that often, but I hear it on the radio about what's going on in the world about climate change, and that's who I trust.
Do you read books, magazines, or online news services?
No, I don't.
Okay. Next question, the same thing. Do you trust Canadian government climate scientists?
I don't necessarily trust the politicians behind them, but I think most of the government scientists that I know are very truthful and factual in the information they impart. I think if the Canadian scientists had more access to politicians, I think that might change some of the attitudes of some of the politicians.
Brayden, what do you think about that? Do you trust Canadian government climate scientists?
Yes, I do. Going off what he said, I do trust them. They are factual. They are trustworthy. And if they did go with politicians, they would probably learn a lot more and be more in depth of how they deliver their factual studies.
Mm-hmm. Following up on that, do you trust our political leaders to protect Canadians from future climate crises?
No, I do not. I just don't trust them mostly. I don't really know. I don't really listen to the news as much, but I don't really trust the political leaders for climate and all that. I trust the scientists behind it. They know more. They have a better background for how they work and how they do things.
So there appears to be then a disconnect between the government scientists and the government politicians.
Yeah.
Claire?
I don't necessarily distrust politicians. I think some of them are actually very good at imparting the right information. But I think politicians in general don't have a science background. They're lawyers, they tend to be non science people. I don't think we elect the very best politicians often. And so I don't trust a lot of them, but some of them I know are good listeners and have the right attitudes towards things like climate change. But I think a lot of politicians are more interested in financial attitudes, financial situations, and right now politicians would rate Medicare as one of the main issues coming up in the next election. And climate change, I think, gets sort of shoved under the table as one of the main priorities. And for that reason, I'm a little bit distrustful of what politicians impart.
Mm-hmm. Brayden, what do you think of that? How can we get politicians to listen to their scientists?
I don't really have a clear solution for that, but I do know that if they were to go and call or talk with them and probably discuss on how climate change is affecting the world and how they could deliver the information to the public, that would probably fix most of the problems with climate change and how they're putting it, just ignoring it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. On that same situation, same question, really. Have you ever written to your MLA or MP urging climate action?
I've never done that. No. Yeah, no.
You don't discuss that in school?
We discuss it in class with our teachers and stuff. We discuss climate change and how that affects the world in different grade levels. This year we haven't really discussed that yet.
Claire, have you ever written to MLA or MP about climate?
I haven't written directly, but I've talked to a lot of MLAs about climate change. And I've talked to also our member of parliament, and she's very receptive to what any suggestions that we have. And you and I, both Bruce, met with a member of parliament from Fredericton area, and found her very receptive to any ideas we had. The MLAs that I've talked to don't rate science and don't rate climate change, rather, as a priority necessarily. They sort of put it in third or fourth or even lower place as far as important issues are concerned. But I think, things are changing. I think Canadians have felt the brunt of climate change just in this last year with floods and forest fires, and mainly in Alberta, and melting permafrost and melting glaciers in our country we're getting more and more news about that all the time. And I think maybe that might change attitudes of politicians.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you sense that there is a change of attitude among the population of Canada? Are they waking up to climate change?
I feel a lot more people are waking up to how the climate changes and stuff like that are affecting the world, and how the news is, bringing it to them, the radio talking about it a lot. I do feel like they're trying to make it a change and how people are concerned about it, but there's also other things they're more concerned about, and they're putting climate change a little bit down the list of importance on how they see it affects them. I'm more,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So they're following in line then with the politicians. Politicians putting climate a ways down the list. I wonder which is leading that push, whether it's the politicians or whether it's the population, the citizens of Canada. Don't know.
Me neither.
Yeah.
People aren't as concerned as they should be about climate change. I know in my my area around Gagetown and the surrounding communities, there are many, many people who don't even believe climate change is taking place, and that scares me.
And that's when the radio and people should come in and talk about it more and maybe make people concerned about it and
Yeah.
try to get that information out there to teach more people and involve more people in trying to,
Yeah.
inform people.
Yeah, I think people are becoming more aware. I think we're underrating the effects of climate change. I'm just thinking about Pakistan. The 33 million people have been affected by flooding in Pakistan just in the last few months. And 6,000 of them, I think, have been displaced from their homes. But we don't really hear that a lot. We're listening more to the effects of Fiona on our area, and that's getting a lot of publicity, which is nothing wrong with that because that's probably effect of climate change that we're getting hurricanes that are that destructive. But we're underestimating what is happening in the rest of the world. We don't get the news as we should about those kinds of calamities. If you say 33 million people are affected in Pakistan, that's almost the population of Canada.
Right.
And we're underrating that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Next question. It seems like, and it's pretty obvious, that a large majority of Canadians now believe that humanity is responsible for climate crises. Instead of education, should we now be driving people to action?
I believe we should do that. I believe that although there is educating people and trying to inform them, but also doing on that action and trying to actually stop climate change is more important than should be higher on the list of importance than others perceive it to be. I feel like that it would be more of a bigger solution if more people were involved in trying to stop climate change.
Claire, what do you think about that? Is it now time to emphasize action instead of education?
Oh, I agree with that. I think education is, of course, important, and we should be emphasizing climate change in all levels of education. But I do think the time now is fast approaching where governments have to take direct action in regulating more what we should be doing to combat climate change.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Who has more to lose from climate disasters? Teenagers or senior citizens?
More to lose. Students have more to lose than us older population, because they're the ones that are going to have to deal with all the effects of climate change in the future, and there could be some devastating problems there that need real solutions. And and the younger population have to be more aware of how to combat those problems.
Brayden, what do you think about that? Is it the students who have more to lose, or is it the dinosaurs?
I feel like that's the students, mostly because I've grown up here and multiple floods has happened just in my area from the rising water levels, and I'm just 16. And well, if I get through school and go through university, I feel like there's a lot more climate change, and if there's more climate disasters going through that for next generations, it's gonna ruin the entire world and how they perceive and how they do things, and just it'll affect everyone negatively, including the seniors.
Yeah, yeah. Um, are your friends, are your peers, are they fearful or concerned about future climate?
Not really. Most of my friends and peers are not usually interested in the news or care about anything really. It's just how this generation is. But mostly, if you're focused on a class that you have, some people are more knowledgeable about these problems and have more concerns of these problems, like just multiple presentations and multiple other schools and facilitators like you coming to other schools and educating and teaching people what's wrong and how's everything going to affect the world for later years to come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Claire, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Um, are you and your
Oh, yes.
family or your friends,
Mhm.
do you discuss climate change, and are they concerned?
My friends, we do discuss climate change often, and my friends feel much the same as I do. But when I go out into the broader community, I find that the people are not as concerned as they should be, I don't think. And some of them are actual deniers of climate change, which really frightens me because I have a feeling right now it's the vast majority of the general population that don't rate it as dangerous as it should be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about discussing it at Thanksgiving dinner with your family? Do you do that, those kinds of things,
We do
or
that kind of thing at Thanksgiving dinners, yeah, at dinners, but
yeah?
not necessarily at Thanksgiving dinner because we didn't have one this year. But it would have been a topic, I'm sure. At most social functions, it is a topic, but uh, um, unless people who are more aware bring it up, it's certainly not discussed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Brayden, when you get together with family, do you discuss issues having to do with climate change?
No, not really. My family doesn't really talk about that. They more focused on themselves during like a dinner or something like that. They were mostly talking about like inflation and something that affects them or multiple people that think that that's more important. And I feel like a vast majority of people think inflation is more important than climate change, which in my opinion, I feel like climate change for like if it were to go on longer and keep on without a solution, it'll affect multiple generations to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I agree with Braden. That's a good answer, Braden.
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure about how many students are have the same attitudes you have, Braden. But why aren't students who are aware of the coming climate disasters? How come you're not out in the streets every day demanding political action?
Well, I feel like not many people would listen to 16-year-old teenagers going out in the public rambling about climate change and more about like if bigger people like politicians or people like more like adults or like the world and the general population were demanding a change for climate and like climate change like the solution if everyone was involved in that it would be way more helpful than just teenagers rambling on the streets about that.
Okay.
Well,
Claire,
I,
what do you think about that? How
well,
useful would it be for teenagers to be out in the streets carrying signs?
I think we have a very good example of that. The young Swedish girl Greta Thunberg, I think her
Yeah.
name is, uh, did bring forward all the issues to the United Nations, to world governments, and look at the publicity she's gotten. And she even was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts. And I think she's a good example for the younger generation. And maybe some of them will be following her example. I think the younger generation are very aware, more aware than some of the adults.
So, because they are aware, should they be protesting at the provincial legislature building?
I would like to see that happen. And when Brayden and I taught environmental science at Oromocto High School for many years, and we on two occasions took a group of students to confront government on environmental issues, once in Halifax and once in Fredericton. And we got quite a good reception from that and quite a bit of publicity from that too. So that was an example of what happened years ago, and I think those things can happen again and should happen again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard any of your friends talking about that, doing a demonstration at the legislature?
No, none of my friends usually talk about
Aha.
that.
Well, you need to educate your
Oh, well, yeah.
friends. There we are. There we are. Diesel school buses. they're just dreadful polluters. They certainly spew out a lot of CO2 and other gases. Plus, they also spread a lot of particulate matter, which is very dangerous to young children. That needs to be an important discussion. Why don't all students bike to school every day?
Most people, like, if they were all to live in Gagetown or Gary, that'd be a long bike ride. And, well, why don't they drive to school? Like, that'd be way better for, well, gas prices are up, but it wouldn't matter. You're saving the earth by not driving a bus. And, like, there's a bunch of buses every day. You could see, like, at least 7 or 8 in one line going down a street, and it's very dangerous to children, to teenage, for the earth and trees, everything. It's just not a good idea. But if people were to bike to school, in the situations they live in, like if you live in Ormoc West, you could just bike here or walk here. But if you live at least 20-minute drive away, that'd be like a 45 to an hour bike ride, depending
Right.
on how fast you are biking. But
Yeah, yeah. It isn't a solution for everybody by any means, but maybe for some, maybe for some. Claire, what do you
Well, I think
think?
Oromocto is a good example of a town that has a lot of bike trails. And I think within the town limits, I think there would be a really positive move to have school buses not pick up students in the town and have them bike to school. But it shouldn't only be the students. I look at Base Gage Town, and if you look at the traffic coming out of Base Gage Town, single drivers, no passengers, hundreds of cars coming out at noon hour, going to work, and they could certainly bicycle as well as students. I just got back from England a few weeks ago, and what I was impressed with the number of bicycles on the streets in London. And certainly European cities that are noted for having bicycles travel to work and to other social events. And I think in Canada we should be moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Does that sound like a sensible thing?
it does sound like a sensible thing. I feel like that's a great idea to have people bike to work and have, if they're close by at least, and if they're not, well, to get a drive as long as you're not using as much diesel and having terrible fumes and pollution in the air.
Yes, yes.
And I believe that school buses are built in Canada that are electric buses. Am I not right in that?
They are.
They're built in Manitoba. And
Yes, yes.
this is another solution to get electric school buses.
Yes, and they make several different sizes, from
Mhm.
van size to big school bus size, that are fully electric. And
And along the same line, I think we should be moving towards more public transportation in general. Bus transportation used to be very popular in the 1960s and 70s, but we don't have buses in our roads very often now. Certainly not picking up people to go shopping or,
yeah,
just for traveling long distances. But, that's another solution too.
yeah, I think so. I think so. Um, our last question: what are some of the things you, Brayden, can do every day to fight climate change?
Well, I personally take the bus, and instead I can get my driver's license soon and go to take the course, and I can get a car instead of driving a bus, which, well, not driving, but riding a bus to school, and that would prevent multiple drives back from.
Mm-hmm.
If everyone did that, it'd be better for them as soon as they turn 16 or 17 to get their driver's license so they could start driving to school instead of taking a bus. I feel like that'd be more beneficial for the air and fight off pollution and climate change.
Mm-hmm. Claire, what do you think?
Oh, I think we all can do a lot to help defeat the effects of climate change. I personally, we've made up our minds that we're going to get an electric car, the next car we get, and so certainly, I do what I can around like composting and raising our own vegetables, and as far as I can. And we were going to install heat exchangers in our house, but we probably put that off now because we're selling our house within the next year or so. But we're hoping that that will happen more often, that people put in heat pumps and save on other forms of fuel.
One thing that we didn't discuss, and Brayden brought it up just now. 16-year-olds. How would you feel about Canada giving the vote to 16-year-olds?
Well, I'm not sure if they're mature enough to go and vote for whatever they'd like at 16. I feel like 18 or 19 are perfect because you're more mature, but at 16, and there's a lot of influencers, and like there's a bunch of social media apps that they don't have their own opinion. They're all, I feel like they'd be like sheep. They'd follow whoever they feel like would be better online, and then whoever they think would be better, and whoever inspires them would go for that vote, which it's their own opinion, their own vote. But I feel like if they waited a little bit longer and they were more mature, they learned about it more in school, about politicians and how they roll and what's gonna go on, and how they impact the government and how they give their information. I feel like that'd be a lot better for people to understand.
You mentioned learning about it in school. Do you have a civics class in school that teaches you what voting is all about?
No, we don't. We do have a political science class, but I don't take that.
It's an elective. I see. Claire, what do you think about voting for 16-year-olds?
Well, I look at people like Brayden and listening to him, and I would certainly be in favor of having somebody like Brayden vote at 16 and maybe even younger. I know that 16-year-olds are allowed to vote in Sweden, Austria, and I really would be in favor of it. Any teenagers that I run across are certainly as much aware, maybe even more so, than some adults I run across. I really think 15, 16-year-olds are mature enough, and I think the number of 16-year-olds that would vote, I think, would be the more socially aware teenagers. Just like 18-year-olds, I think not every 18-year-old is going to vote, but those who have really important issues are going to show up and vote, and people that don't are going to just ignore it. I think 16-year-olds shouldn't be able to vote. Certainly, we give 16-year-olds a lot of credit or leeway now, and they decide their own medical issues, and they don't have to listen to anybody else except their doctor in deciding what they're going to do medically. I think if a 15-year-old can do that, a 16-year-old could vote.
What about education? The province of Ontario has a required class for essentially how to be a citizen. Should the province of New Brunswick take up something like that to educate 16, 17, and 18-year-olds?
You know, we used to have a civics course in our schools back in the 1960s and early 70s, and it was a compulsory course in grade 8. And but that sort of went by the board, and but I think it was a very worthwhile thing.
Does that sound like it would appeal to a great number of?
I feel like that'd be a cool class to attend, and like if it was a compulsory and not an elective, I feel like more people would be more inclined into having to take the class and like get good grades and pay attention more because it's worth their mark and worth their grade to become a citizen, to become who they are and how they'll affect the world and how their opinions and views will affect others.
Yeah. Well, we'll tell that to the school boards. They need to do that. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our effort here. I really want to thank you both. You had some interesting answers to these questions, and maybe we can have more discussions like this as we go on.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you.